Hey guys, so in this lecture we're going to be seeing errors. In fact, we'll span this discussion in 2 videos. So before even we get started, errors will happen. So irrespective of how smart of or how big or how expert of a coder you are, errors will happen. You can expect different types of error to happen. So when you're coding an application or a JavaScript program, errors can be coding errors made by the programmer or yourself. Errors can be due to the wrong input. Let's say you were expecting a particular type of an input, but the input was not up to the expectation, and that's why the error occurred. And other are unforeseeable errors, which is you don't expect them to happen, but they happen. And that's where JavaScript yells, hey, look at it, or probably this is where the problem is, you need to go and fix it. So errors will happen. Now let's see a very good example. So I have already written the skeleton of it. Let's try to write an alert. So let's say alert, and I'll say welcome students, and this. Let's try to run it with JavaScript, and you should see a welcome students alert. Everything worked. Now let me just mistype the alert to as alert X. For example, let's run, nothing will happen. So as you're coding in JSBin, there is a very easy option to go and check what the problem is, but I'll show you the other way too. So let's go and run it here, and you'll see alert X is not defined. It very clearly says that this is where the problem is. And in most cases, just because it's a compressed version out here, but if you see it in the browser or somewhere, you will always see the line number 2 where this problem has occurred, and you can go and fix it. You run it and you get the alert. So that's how you can actually do it in JSBin. But we don't have to use JSBin all the time. Let's see if we create an element, let's say a p tag, which is id equals error display. And let's close it. Let's copy this. Let's see a very cool thing that JavaScript provides us. So before even getting into what it does and how it works, let me just give you a syntax of it. So syntax is try some code, then you close this, then you say catch, then you catch the exception, which is the error, and then you have some block of code here as well. Block of code to handle error. Now let me put this into the comments so that it doesn't hinder with our execution. And now let me explain you. So let's put this into an English. So let's say try. So you say JavaScript, try this. JavaScript, try that. So that's how you say JavaScript, try this block of code. Now in this block of code, you will put in your code that you try to execute. JavaScript will try to execute it. If it finds no errors, it will just execute perfectly. But the moment it finds an error, it will throw out, it will yell, it will shout, hey, there is an error. And how do you know that JavaScript is shouting? You put a catch. So just outside the block of code, you put a catch block. Now what does a catch block say? Catch the error. So whatever the error is, catch it. And then execute a block of code that you need to execute if there is an error. So you also have an option to execute few things when you get an error. So that's how the try catch block that JavaScript provides us. Now let's put it to use in our example of alert. So let's say I have a try. I execute the block of code which is alert students, and then I say a catch, let's say error, and here instead of actually doing anything, printing out to things, I'll just do a document.getElement by id that we have been seeing all along, and error display p tag, update the inner HTML of it with error.message. Now the error that you get, or the error that the JavaScript shouts, yells and says, hey, there is an error. Error has two properties or two attributes, which is error.message and error.name. So we'll see that in detail, but let's try to run this example now and see what happens. Everything should work. You should get an error. Now let's do this as alert X. Let's run, and alert X is not defined. You see that? This is the error message that you saw even in the console. Let me open the console, clear, run with JS, and nothing displays on the console. The reason is you're catching that block of code. But if you're not catching that block of code, you can just do a console.log error. Let's clear this, let's run it again, and it has an error object. You can do an error.message, and you can see alert X is not defined. Let me close the console, let's go back. So this is the alert X is not defined. You can easily get that. So that's how you use a try catch block. The reason we say it is a block, because you say JavaScript try something, you say JavaScript says hey catch something, and you have block of code that executes within. But what if you want to throw an error? Let's say you don't want JavaScript to yell, but if you check for a condition, you know that this is a problem, and you yourself as a programmer wants to shout out saying, hey, this is an error, and I don't even want JavaScript to waste time on it. I know that this is an error. Let's throw. It could be a business condition, it could be a validation, or it could be a genuine error that you're checking for. So whenever an error occurs, JavaScript will normally stop and generate an error message. The technical term that we use is JavaScript throws an exception. Now, how do you throw an exception? Well, let's try to see another example. This is going to be a bigger example. So let me just start typing. I will keep this commented. Actually, let it be. I don't mind having it in there. Let's try to create some awesomeness. So let's create an input tag, which is input. Let's turn this off because it actually distracts me. So input id is equals to example. We can call anything we want to. It's of type text. That's an input, and let's try to. It's okay if you don't give a closing or opening, it will be working in any case. Then you give in a button, and again remember the button always had an on type. Sorry, one second. Button already had the type, and we used to always give the on click because that's how we called on click. Okay, on click equals to my function. And let's close this, let's close this. Let's say test input. Let's close the button. Now let's do a p tag, which is id equals to, let's say, message, and let's close the p tag so that there's nothing. We can just start with message will be displayed here, for instance, so that we know that the message will be there. Now let's quickly write the my function that we already gave up. So my function. Now let's put the same try catch logic here. Before even going further, let's do a variable message comma x, where we declare two variables. Message is document dot get element by id is equals to message. Now let's update the inner HTML is equals to nothing. So this will do is replace message will be displayed here with a blank or nothing. Now let's get the input, which is x is equals to, let me just copy this so that we know what element we need. And oh, this should be no equal here. Let's get the input, which was example. So this will be variable x, and now we need to get the value of that x. So that's how you get the value of x, whatever is inputted. Now let's try to put a try catch block here and see what happens so that we can do a throw as well. So try catch. It usually happens that you give a try and a catch block together. You can either give it as ERR, or some developers have an habit of catch E, especially people who are working with Java. Here you can do an if x is double equals to quote. Let's say if there's nothing entered, you say throw. You can give the name as empty. So it will be treated name and value as empty. Let's copy this because we'll try to put in a lot of conditions here. Let's say if is not a number, if it's not a number x, then you can throw not a number, or you can display not a number. Now let's convert it to a number, because you have already checked for the not a number condition. Now let's convert it to a number, which means it's a number. So x is a number. So now we do a type conversion here, and once we're done with the type conversion, we check if x is less than 5. We say too low, and let's say if x is greater than 10, we say too high. So we can bound it between 5 and 10. And now when I throw any of these errors, what I can do is I can do a message, because it's the catch block. And catch block says if an error is shouted from here, catch it here and then use it. So this will be the error object that I can use. And because I'm throwing an empty, I can use the message, which is error, whatever I'm typing. This is the error for me. So I can just do an error, and I can say input is, and let's put the error, and let's see what happens with the error. Now let's run with JS. Let's type in nothing and then run. Okay, it did not run, which means we are definitely getting an error and we don't know what we have done wrong. So let's try to see our function, which is my function, start and close braces. Then we have a try, we have a catch. That looks nice. If condition, if condition, if condition in a loop. Okay, I forgot to give the name function here. So that's why it did not run. Let's run this. Let's test. Input is empty. That's what it updated. Now let's try to enter some blah blah blah. It says it's not a number. Let's try to enter a number 3. It says it's too low. Let's try to enter 6. It will not do anything because 6 is an acceptable value. Let's say 11 or 12 and it will give you too high. So that's how you can code for a function in JavaScript and actually throw different type of errors depending, or and again you can use the catch block to actually see how that error is, or display or take an action on what that error is. Just a word of caution here, the example that we took can easily be done using an input tag with the modern browser, where let me show you an example where you can create an input example 2. It's of type text, and then you can say instead of text you can do a number, because it's a number and the numbers are accepted. You say minimum value is 5, it will give you a file. Maximum value is, let's say 10, because that's an acceptable number between 5 and 10, and step is equals to 1. If you do this, the modern browser should actually make you work with it. Let's say 1, and it will give you the same type of numbers. So you get that? Okay. Now let's see another concept, which is called the finally statement. So the finally statement lets you execute code after try and catch regardless of the result. So you remember when we did do while, we said, oh, one time the block of code needs to be executed before we actually even check the condition. Similarly, the try and catch will work by itself, but you can also give a finally, which means in any case, if try happens, if any error happens, if it's caught, even if it's an internal exception or an external exception, you can do a finally block out here. So you can just do a finally block and say console.log I am in finally. So irrespective of what you type in, actually let's just update one of the values in the p tag, so that's easier. We don't have to go to the console log. Let's say finally, and then let's go here and do a document dot get element by id. Let's get finally, And let's update the inner HTML. Equals to finally executing. Okay, let's try to run this example. Let's don't give anything and you say finally executing. So even if there was an error, it gave an execution. Now let's say if I'm not catching anything and I don't do anything here, this gets commented out. You run with JS, test, only finally will execute, because irrespective of the exception is caught or not caught, finally will be executed. Let me just revert this back, run it, test input, and everything should work.